Today we're going to look at a few ancient maps, starting with Herodotus' map. There are some other ones before that, but a lot of them are piecemeal. If you've looked at one of my ancient Sumerian stories, they show you a map of the world that kind of looks like this. It is roundish, and then it shows you little symbols off to the side in what here would be water. And that tells you that in that direction is this land, this land, this land. And again, that would have been people from right up in here, between the Tigris and Euphrates. And when we look at a map like this, I try to point out things that maybe people don't notice, things that are incorrect that later get corrected, stuff like that. This can show you how history changes. Indeed, whenever you look at things like this, you have to almost take it from these people's knowledge point of view. When we look at it through our current eyes, we have a lens that's hooked up a lot of information, and so it doesn't make sense. But if you understand back then, they didn't get around so much. There were trade routes. You heard things. I hear things, that type of thing. And a lot of conjecture. You can tell by Herodotus' story, which I've gone over quite frequently, that you can tell that whenever he gets away from the Mediterranean, and especially the eastern part of the Mediterranean and up more north and through here, that it gets more and more sketchy. It gets a little more out in left field. Indeed, his map shows things like that. But what I want to point out here, this is a simplistic form of his map. He has one that's more in detail, but on the simplistic one, you can see some details that are quite important that might get lost on the big map. Now, whenever you live right in here, the Phoenicians did, and on Carthage, on this line, when the sun sets, it sets right out here through this line. So they said it set from the Pillars of Hercules, and this is Soleus. Sol is the sun, so we have that. Now, if you've seen my video on Atlantis, here we have the Atlas Mountains, and the god of Atlas that used to hold up the world, or does hold up the world now, and Atlantis, that's where Atlantis is, and that they thought the Nile came up and went past Meroe, but then it didn't continue up and wiggle and go in down way up into sub-Saharan Africa, that it actually twisted and came out here and ran right off of these mountains. And in fact, there's other weird depictions through here. I'll show you here in a few other maps, but I want you to look at this area, and this is where they believe the Nile came from back then. They also, if you look at this, don't have any idea that there's a sub-Saharan Africa at all. The Horn of Africa is not drawn correctly, right? Persia, or the Arabian Peninsula here, is not drawn correctly. Persia is not drawn correctly in any way, shape, or form. India doesn't even have its point on it either. I'd like to also make a note that they talk about the Ethiopians that are up here, and in Ethiopia today would be way down here about where my pointer just barely gets to, and that's not what they were talking about as Ethiopians. They also talked about people living out here called Ethiopians. They also talked about people living over here in Arabian Peninsula as the Sand People, as Ethiopians. They also spoke about these, and you see it written on the map clearly, Eastern Ethiopians. The Indus Valley, India has the darker skinned people in the southern part. He said that's what was here, but up here wasn't, right? Later he calls these people up here Aryans. He also calls all these people Aryans. He calls the people of Medes Aryans. He calls the people here Aryans. He calls, and then he tells you that they've changed their name, that Medes changed their name whenever Media had come from Athens, as Persia had done when Persis came. So here's Ammon. So Ammon, right? That's here. And we think about Baal-Hamon and Hadad as being out here. Here's Ammon. There's Cyrene. Carthage would be up here at a point. This is Tunisia. But they don't have it on this map. So let's look at another one. I want to show you another version. This right here shows you that they call it Libya. In fact, all of Africa is called Libya. Well, really, it's trapped under what is the Nile. Then the rest of this is the area over here that's the Atlanteans, coming off of the Atlas Mountains, right? And they have Nesomones. Here later, they're going to call these people lotophages, which means lotus eaters, and that has a narcotic semblance to it, and a drink called soma, and a few things that go along with Aryans, strangely enough, and connect way over here to India. But in this also they call it macrobio, which means a lot of wildlife, basically. And so back down here, that's all that's here. They don't mention Lake Victoria. They don't mention the falls that are there, or Lake Tanganyika, Malawi. In fact, look, it's just cut off. They don't even know that it exists. West Africa doesn't exist. The Horn isn't drawn correctly. The Red Sea is not drawn at a kick, but pretty much straight in a southern shot. The rivers here are drawn extremely long. In fact, this river here is shown to be just long, long river. It comes all the way from Celtic lands. They showed Celtic in the other one, Hyperboreans up top. The Indus Valley River is drawn straight, running east to west in a wiggle, which is not correct. They always want to put extremely long rivers in here. There's a time here and before that people had a belief that the mountain people had sprung forth life to all the people, and if you would go up a river, you would see where the people down the river came from, and their whole thinking there is it's easy to float down a river and to follow a river down, but harder to go up a river and impossible to take a boat up a river unless it's being pulled or something. Therefore, you can see the projection of people going down river. Well, and so they draw giant rivers and so on, and try to connect it in that way. That gets pulled out of really the scene a short series after. But back at this time too, this is the Red Sea. This is not the Red Sea. The Red Sea's off the coast of India. This is the Erythraean Sea, which kind of means the Red Sea, but this is the Red Sea out here. Now, I don't want to get these two out of timeline here, but I do want to show you something, and I'm going to go back just a second and then try to run through. But if you'll look now, they've got Persia over here kind of correct, the Arabian Peninsula kind of correct, and this is some 519 AD map that's correlated by somebody, and you can tell that they're still very much influenced on the earlier map, but they're really getting a lot closer. So you can tell people have been around these coasts. There has been trade to here. India comes down in a point, and then it cuts up here, and the Ganges River in the basin runs this way. The Indus Valley runs this way. And they even know about Sri Lanka down here, although it's nowhere near drawn correct, and called Taprobane. So you have that effect. Now, they believe that the Caspian Sea here connects all the way up to a giant sea that's just above Europe, that Russia doesn't quite exist. So you see this is these people, and this area here's thoughts on how far things go. And again, Africa is not even called Africa. It's all called Libya. Not just the little spot that's right here. It's called Libya today, but it's all called Libya. There are Carthage way down here instead of here, and they have this river running way in. If that's the Niger River, it's supposed to be about here. And this is drawn incorrectly, out of skew. Again, Iberia, Spain, it's not there. It's not drawn correctly. This is Britain, and this is Ireland, and that's nowhere near right. Look at these little islands over here. So that's supposed to be Scotland and Ireland, or what's it? What the hell does it? And then what's this? Is that the edge of Greenland? Up there, very top. I don't know. Just kind of fades. They're kind of like, and then look at that little bean right there on the edge. Well, the idea is here that here's Greenland, and there's Iceland, and it's a little bitty bean up there in frozen land. Well, in reality, Greenland is icy and a smaller rock, and Iceland is a bigger, nicer place. But I think the people that traded with them and didn't want other people to do so, and back in the time of Vikings and so might have had a different reality they wanted to project to people. You know, in all the old maps out here, it's there be monsters and woo and all that. So you don't want to go there. Oh no 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 no. And so that now they draw the Nile coming out and just feeding out like that now. So they still don't quite know the end of the Nile. In fact, it took for a long time, and the horn's drawn correctly. But again, West Africa doesn't really exist. You know, past here we are in Caucasian lands all the way up and around through all of North Africa always is. So sub-Saharan Africa, they're just unclear about. They know about the horn though, right? Conspicuously up here, these mountains are called Taurus. This is where the bulls come from. This is where cattle came from. Tigris and Euphrates area. And they came down and into Egypt. Now, a weird thing about this is that he calls this Libya, and he calls this Asia, and this Europe. He kind of gets them about the same size, and it really just looks like a ball in a lot of pictures. And when you look at this, you can see that whenever he puts in what is Asia, and not Africa, but Asia, A and S are over here, and IA are over there. Meaning that when Herodotus concluded this, Egypt was definitely in Asia in his mind after seeing the people and the things, and it was not necessarily in Africa, which at this time everyone up here is Caucasoids anyhow, and this is Libya. And later they just call the whole area Libya, but yet in his other map and even other maps, Asia starts right here, at least with the A. And it says Asia. When they draw lines, they draw it on the other side of the Nile, way over here, and do it there. There's also a delineation always at the Caucasus Mountains, but then they don't say that Europe ends there. It ends down here after Colchis. Now we're talking about Herodotus's map here, so the Culkians, which are there, let me go back to another map here. Now his delineation here, of course, was the Phasis River. And he said the people live beyond the Phasis, so that would be here. Anything south of this were called Asians, and everybody on that side of it were all part of Europe. And Europe is called Europa, and that was from a Phoenician queen that lived here in Phoenicia on the side of the Mediterranean. So connections all there. That's a whole different video though in itself. It could really, yeah. Colchis is where the Culkians lived, and that's where Herodotus said the Culkians are Egyptians. He noted it as himself before others even affirmed the fact to him, and that they had wavy long hair and looked like them, but he couldn't make the connection, perhaps because they weren't at the equator constantly, they weren't as tan. But he said they practiced circumcision, and the way that they make linens and everything is exactly the same as the Egyptians. And so he talked to them about it, and the Colchians remembered it, of course, but the Egyptians did not. And so they did, and they knew that they were, but they weren't, like assured of when this all happened. And so strangely, he said that the Colchians remembered having come directly from the Egyptians. The Egyptians thought that whenever Sesostris' army had come in antiquity, that they were left up there and as a garrison situation, and then blended into the normal society and became Colchians and stuff. But when you talk to the Colchians, they go, no, 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 we've been here a lot longer than that. And so there becomes this thing. Well, in Herodotus' story, he tells you what the people tell him. Quite often, he's just telling you what they tell you. He's not telling you, this is the truth. He goes, and they say, and it is known, and this is said, And they said that. Quite often he'll even give you an idea that he does not agree with it, but this is what they say, you know, and so on. He talks about in India that what collects gold are giant ants that are bigger than dogs, big as dogs, big as the big dogs, but bigger than dogs. People that dogs back then, they didn't have giant mastiffs and things, but giant ants, you know, like in the TV shows and stuff, giant ants, and they collect it, and then the people would grab and have to run it because the ants were pretty fast, and they'll kill you, and you don't want to die in the pinchers of an ant. And of course, this is just a strange story, but people know what ants are and how bad they bite, and you're like, whoa, you know. So there's giant ants in India. Of course, they had ideas of, you know, griffins and things like this. This is finding a triceratops's beaked head and then trying to come up with what this thing looked like, and then they gave it a zodiacal reference, and I've made a video about that. But so here we, you know, you can see the way that it already changed a couple of times, and Agrippa's just way the hell up here, and they don't know, it's unexplored. They don't know what's up here. They call this sea up here the Cronum Sea, or Sea of Cronus. And since Cronus was a Phoenician, it goes back here, that almost tells you that those people are Vikings. Before the Vikings, they were the people that were the same as some of those people. And the Celts, and the Irish, and the people that live here at Atlantis. And it all goes together. Red-haired people in the Bible, like David and Solomon, right? And even Muhammad later. So redhead, they have pieces of his beard. People there today dye their beards red like he used to do as he started to get old, they said, to keep his youthful look. Well, there it is. What was his youthful look? It was red. You know, if it was any other color, it would have been that color. So there's something symbolic about that too. And, you know, when Herodotus tells you that he met the Egyptians and the Ethiopians, and he talks about India and says India is a little darker than the Ethiopians, and the Ethiopians are a little darker than the Egyptians. Well, the Ethiopians he may be talking about is this people, or he may be talking about these people, or he may be talking about these people, or he may be talking about these people. I'm not sure. He's surely not talking about the Negroids that you see in the Egyptian art there. You know, those are called Nubians, and they're just about tar black. In fact, the people that live there now in the Sudan and stuff, they're pretty much that way. Of course, there's a Caucasian population there too that's somewhat admixed over time, but that kind of shows you what used to be there a long time ago, all the way up through to that area. And again, the Nile goes freaky. So let's look at a different map. Now, I know this is a terrible map, and it almost looks like something drawn with a kid by crayons, some type of crap like that, really, doesn't it? But believe it or not, this is really the Ptolemaic map that they have. There's a few important things about this map, but I want to show you where we are because some of this is just not even familiar. The Red Sea gets way too wide and then pinches back off and then lets out, and it does have somewhat that effect. Horn of Africa does not contain this large plummet sticking out here that's huge, nothing like that. And then it doesn't connect here at the bottom and run around at the bottom here. This says that Antarctica is attached to all the bottom of continents, and it's huge. And this isn't true. And it's not even like possible, even if we took a lot of water out or did anything, it never would connect like this correctly. So he shows the Nile and how it comes up and runs right up to here. But then there's other sources that come from here and run down, right? So we're way above Meroe, right? And they know that that's how far it goes, and it exists to there, right? But then also over here, where we had Atlantis earlier, you can see this conspicuous, these are rivers, wiggly wiggly, and they keep stopping at like little lake points here, little oases all the way through here. And we don't note that this exists in any way, shape, or form, but it's something they surely note, that this may be the oases connecting little rivers that no longer go anymore. I think in an early video I told you they could be just that there's water under the ground table. But no, this is river sets. And you look in that video that I did where it shows you Google Earth, and you can see where ancient rivers ran, that if it ever rained real hard there, these rivers would flow again, but they haven't. And they haven't for a long, long time. In fact, sand has pretty much filled them all in. It's all just sedimented in. It doesn't really show you what was there anymore, and it's all covered up with dunes and just kind of covered up there. But this map right here, you can see these squares and these lines. Hopefully that shows up in the video, and you can see the edge of the map here, right? And in doing so, he ended up showing you these winds that are blowing, and down here there's winds that are blowing. And so there's, you know, the east wind and all that type of stuff. But then this is the first time that a map's been drawn where it's actually like set across a globe. And if you look, here's the curvature of it in the top and how it's cut off. It doesn't have the Arctic Circle. That doesn't exist. And in fact, that's almost exactly the Arctic Circle, just a little smaller than that. But that's the good representation. Now, the problem is when we do break the equator down here at the bottom, he doesn't start egging it back down. Well, it kind of does over here, I guess. But the declination of the map doesn't do so. So we're looking at longitude and latitude at this state, the Ptolemaic, you know, whenever the Greeks are running Egypt and so on. And shortly after Alexander. Alexander's map is a lot more revealing with a lot more rivers and things that are on it and showing you a lot of names. In fact, it's one of those huge maps that's, you know, supposedly some 4 foot by 3 foot on a giant piece of vellum. Must have took a whole hide of a cow and made into the map where you would see small things and, you know, sit back from it and can see it a large way. But it had little rivers names, so everybody could go, you know, they knew where the hell they were going. And you can tell by that a lot more trade. Something to note here is there's a lot more trade going all the way over into India and then into China and Mongolia, and Silk Roads forming here, and a lot of information about this. And now they finally realize there's a bunch of South Africa down here. They haven't wrote any names about it. They cut the horn off, and it doesn't come down to a point over here. It just attaches to this whole big land area that's just huge. Right? Doesn't really make sense. Let's look at another map. So now we're going to jump back in time here. This is the Babylonian map that I was referring to earlier. This is known to be the earliest map in the world. There may have been some on vellum or animal skins that kind of were like this, but this is, of course, written in their stone-cooked clay, and therefore lasted a lot and a long time and has a duration to it and still exists today and hasn't crumbled away. You know, just the Dead Sea Scrolls, they had to be hermetically sealed or they would have just been rotted away to dust. In fact, they're almost there and they were able to conserve somewhat. I want you to note something about this tablet here. I want you to know that it's covered with a layer of clay. It's made for setting and bricking, but look at the smooth kind of thing that it's on, and that this is a student tablet that would have been pressed over the top of and smeared on and then drawn on and so on. And this may have been the teacher's example, or it may have been a student that did it extremely well and was kept and fired. You know, like some third grade art project, but yet done quite well. I'm not saying a third grader did this in any way, shape, or form. I'm saying it's at that kind of level of what you might think of in a modern ideology. But you see this triangle here, and this triangle here, this writing here, this writing here, and triangle. There's a triangle out here. It's been broken off. People have found other versions of this. It has a triangle down here and one straight down that's broken off. And in fact, with this, they found the piece that goes to the bottom of it. It would be a piece of a triangle, but it's not fully the part of it. You see here's a circle. In that circle, they tell you it's water. So this again looks like that. They're telling you the Tigris and Euphrates here, and it runs through the city, right? And that they have averted it and run it right through the city, right? So that's kind of neat too, showing you this is this Babylonian tablet, though. This is way late. This is way post-Sumerian, Akkadian, Babylonian tablet. So you're getting something a little bit later than what we were looking at. A lot of the Sumerian things we look at, and the Sumero-Akkadian things we're looking at. This is the Sumo-Akkadio-Babylonian, or really Akkado-Babylonian, if you will. But there's one of the earliest maps, if not the earliest map known to man. River running through it. Highways. Dots are cities that are up and down the coast, or not necessarily coast, but up and down the land they live in, but they just make it round. They're just saying, in our land, and here's a scope around it, if you will. Far cry different than this right here, isn't it? Knowing especially that those pictures were done from people that lived right in here. And if they live right in here, they were centering that area and saying this river ran through there is Babylon. Not too far downriver from exactly there. Persia's tucking in over here. Indus Valley drawing a little bit more. So this is somebody who has altered this slightly to reality, but not much. Now here's a map in 43 AD. It's a little different, and I know it looks real strange to you, but it's because it's on its side. Okay, this is Europe here. Here's Africa, and then A starts over here in Egypt, and Asia goes around here, Asia, right? And then they put Ethiopia there, but they also put Ethiopia here. They also call this Aryan lands and the Arya River. Here's Persia, right? So we're looking down here, and here's Egypt, and here's the Nile River and its delta running up. And they show you the different cataracts and pools that are in it. Right as it hits Meroe, they break it into pieces. They say it comes off a mountain set that runs before that. Two different places that converge right there and go on. But one of the rivers goes from there out here through what we know as Ethiopia pretty much today, and cuts off the Horn of Africa and out into the Arabian Peninsula and the Arabian Sea. That's what they used to call this. The Red Sea was the water out here, right? But look at this head looking thing with the island in the middle of it that's huge. What is that? This is supposed to be Arabia. And then there's this giant inlet that's a big circle around an island, right? The Persian Sea. There's no thing like that exists. Now, if you're looking at the Red Sea and then the Arabian Gulf, it doesn't come in like that. It's even smaller than this, and it pokes in at just a slightly different angle. That's an oddity. You can see by now, just in this map here, let me zoom in, and you can see that if this map is huge again, and so you can see the little names written beside everything. Little names written everywhere. I mean, this is quite the detail that's on it. But yet in this version again, they don't quite draw Spain, Hispania, correctly. Now they've got Britain listed here. Britain Insula, the Britain Islands, right? This little bitty round island in a square, right? The Gulf comes in like this. It's somewhat of a pyramid shape, if you will. There's a gulf up here with these islands all set into it like the Sumerian dots, and then a crop circle dot set here is sitting out in the ocean. And then here it says Galilee, right? the Gala people. Europe, back then the U is a V looking letter. Europe, on all the way through there in Gallia, right here. Gallia. So Gauls and Galatians. Gallia. Gaul means milk and white milk, whatever. Yeah. Ivory. Vanilla. So here's another thing, though, is that this isn't the way Africa looks. And we're looking at it from the side, and the north they just draw kind of coming across. And look at these giant inlets that are here. All these islands, of course, all look like little beans. But then whenever you come around the corner, they show the two rivers, and then it just cuts off. There's no West Africa. There's no Sub-Saharan Africa. It just shoots straight across. Now they call this area Hesperi, and then the Ethiops are off in this area. Showed you in the other map where the Ethiops are in here too, in Arabia, in this area. Then they're also over by India, which is not drawn correctly at all here. And again, so the Aryans lived in India, and there is Tofane. That's the same name that we have for Sri Lanka. And they have the other maps, the other islands here. Strangely, where is it? Is it going to be able to say it? Here we go. Solace, right? So there's Solace. Now the problem with this is, if we're looking at the land of the sun rising and sun setting, it's supposed to be way up over here, and you would know it today as Japan. And Solace and Stillus, this is the rising sun, Solace, okay, the rising sun. Isn't it strange how Japan is even known the land of the rising sun? And no matter where you are, the sun rises and sets in your horizon. So why would that be the land of the rising sun? Whenever you lived over here in the Mediterranean, the land of the rising sun is, hell, you think it's Sumeria. When you get in Sumeria, you think it's here. Well, you have to go all the way till you hit the ocean, and then there's the little island that's there. Why would it be the next land? Why would it be across a water? Why would it be thought of in that way?